Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
My God, it's full of stars.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly. As always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm fine right now, but my hands seem to be strapped into manacles in the chair, and I'm worried if this conversation goes poorly.
Yes, well, we're all about democracy here, so this is going to go to a vote. Yes, but ladies and gentlemen, we are back with our continuing our Doctor Who retrospective. We're going through, got to the sixth Doctor, Colin Baker. And we are going to be talking about, again, just one story from each of the Doctors that we have been told, or we found to be the nominated, the recognised story. And this time we're talking Vengeance on Varos. A two-parter. They seem to have moved format by this point. Each episode 45 minutes long rather than the sort of half an hour formally. And I think most of the Colin Baker stuff seems to be two-parters. The story is that the Doctor, newly sort of formed or relatively newly sort of formed as the sixth Doctor, doesn't really seem to know how the TARDIS works. And after a series of issues, it is left drifting powerless through space. However, they find they have some emergency backups that can take them to the planet Varos, where there is a rare element or the TARDIS requires to power up and to travel through time and space. Once they arrive there, they find that Varos is under a sort of typical fascistic regime that seems to actually, though, focus around voting and democracy, but also the manipulation of the price of the ore and the people there. And of course, the Doctor and his companion Perry get involved and resolve the whole socio-political situation before sodding off again. So, Julie, what were your initial thoughts then of Vengeance on Varos?
Well, I want to say this was the only season where Doctor Who had the hour-long format. And it seems that the previous season was sort of in a bridge season, and so they sort of got a more full season, except it was shifted to this alternate format. I like this. I mean, I think it's very uneven, Vengeance on Varos, but it strikes me as darker. I mean, we've seen other sort of dystopian setups before, but this is a darker presentation of it, sort of more fitting for 1985 and Thatcher's Britain. And also, this Doctor seems to be still a little bit bumbling, but very much in the mold of a sort of Han Solo compared to the sort of Doctor. I mean, he's killing people a couple of times.
Yeah. Well, there's a few times where they try to sort of the killing people and his handling and use of weapons comes up. I mean, let's not be clear. At one point, he basically pushes accidentally one guy and then possibly purposefully a second person into a vat of acid.
Yeah. That is a famous scene from this. It was very controversial.
Yeah, I can see why. I watched it and I was a bit like, oh, I'm not sure how I feel about that.
Well, and he also early on he turns that the ray that is being used to torture the prisoner toward the guards, and a guard gets killed by it, and then he shoots a guy later.
Yeah. This is much more of the sort of again on the adventuring side, but he is definitely a darker. And the only thing I really know of the Sixth Doctor of this version is he is known to be quick to temper, and he is one of the lesser loved of the Doctors. However, I would say that I kind of enjoyed him in this.
Yeah, I did too. If only because he's so different, right? I mean, he
Yeah.
does seem sort of younger. He has that kind of like roguish Han Solo element, which I can see would be appealing in 1985, not only post, Han Solo and Star Wars, but also post sort of Dirty Harry and, all of this sort of darker stuff of the 80s.
Yeah, it fits. It seems to fit into that mold, isn't it? This is sort of like, and not to say it's sort of like, the Dark Doctor Returns or something. Like, this isn't like Frank Miller's Doctor, but like, it definitely edges towards that. I mean, and not just the Doctor in this, like the actual planet of Varos, is very, well, dark. Actually dark in one month, but like they have really gone out of their way to present like a real sort of like problematic dystopian planet. But I love its origins as well. Like, I love the fact that this isn't just a sort of some of the things we've had in the past, like, going back to the terror on the second Doctor story with the crabs, where we're just like, it's a colony and we're mining for this and that. Like, one of the things that comes out, it's sort of like a dropped line, I think it's in the first episode, is that this was a former prison that was left to its devices, and the guards became the like the ruling elite, and the prisoners, or the generations from the prisoners, basically became the underclass, this mining class and stuff. And I love that. I love the fact that there's this like weird sort of caste system, this class system that's been put in place that actually stems back to the original purpose of this site. It wasn't just a colony that was sort of like, oh, we're going to have a colony here, and sort of like, this was a prison planet that was used for mining, and then through its purpose changed, but the people didn't leave. And so you have this. I thought I loved that. I thought it was a fantastic. I mean, Alien 3 sort of chose to do that later on in '93. So, I think it's a great concept.
I think that's a very good point. I hadn't thought about the Alien 3 point, although the sort of mining colony sort of has become a bit of a cliche. And I think the comparison to the Macro Terror is really fascinating, because both of those have, like in Macro Terror, you have to hypothesize more of that colony's evolution.
Yeah.
And here there's a little more concern for it. The depiction of a totalitarian state is more brutal. It does not pull its punches as much.
It shows. We should highlight. So basically, sort of like what you get is the Doctor interacts with what I would consider to be the ruling elite. Let's just say the government, and that is often the case with these sort of like these situations. Lands on the planet ends up involved with a sort of like take me to your leader kind of bullshit, and that's what happens. And one of the things that we have often said whilst talking about these stories is, well, what happened to the populace? Or what happened to those other people? Like, we haven't had a full representation, and this story even addresses that. Like, it's not a full view of the entire populace, but you get this sort of, I don't know, let's call it a household. You get this husband and wife that the story sort of flashes back to.
Are they husband and wife?
I don't know. I assume so. They may be brother and sister, or they could just be. I think he refers to himself as a husband at one point. I may be wrong, but you have these people that are the populace, and one of them is the woman is very. She sort of supports the regime, and she's always sort of voting in the way that she thinks the regime wants to go, and the guy is obviously very much sort of like, oh, I'm bored, this guy's useless, and he's sort of like, they're incompetent, and and often votes no. But what I thought was more interesting, instead of it sort of like, because they have the rebels as well, like, again, they always have this the rebel force. But one of the things I thought, and I want to talk about this couple, one of the things I thought was most interesting is they both sort of vote out of a position of almost stubbornness. Not objectivity. And you see that in some cases, like with the votes, like there's one about, we'll get to the ore, the element that they're mining, where the governor actually, so it's ruled by a governor who actually has a term or whatever, and this voting system. So they put there's these certain decisions. Whenever they put certain decisions out, they get voted upon. Like everybody gets to vote, and by the sound of it, you don't get a choice. Like you have to vote or you get punished. And then if the government doesn't win the vote, they get hit by this beam. But one of the things he actually says is, look, we need to hold out on these negotiations. And actually, if we hold out, we can get a better price for this element that we're mining. But it's going to hit us in the short term. We're going to lose 10% of our rationing for this short term, but it's going to benefit us in the long term. And the woman just goes, well, that's what the government wants to do, so I'm going to vote yes. And he just votes, well, I don't like them, so no. Mm-hmm. And, there's no sort of objectivity of looking at it and going, well, here's the situation, this is what we should do. And it happens again later. And you have this thing about viewing reports and that, and we'll get onto the torture. But I thought it was really interesting that it doesn't have clear-cut lines. There's no like, he's right, she's wrong, she's right, he's wrong. Like throughout it, it just shows that, but basically they're not informed, they're not aware of the full facts, and so they are forming a decision or an opinion based on their gut of how they feel about the party that's in power. And I thought that was really interesting.
Well, it reminds us of today.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Right. I mean, one person is Labor, the other person's Tory. I mean, one's a Democrat, the other's a Republican, and they vote based on that. And it's really basically like, do you trust this governor or do you hate him? Yes. His actual argument, which I think is clearly correct, I think the governor shown to be correct by the end. And he's thinking in the long term. But I think that's fascinating. But I also think that it's interesting the portrayal of democracy here and the way that democracy is sort of co-opted. That this is a totalitarian state, and really the governor is not actually the one in charge. Really, this sort of military regime is in charge. And what happens is when a governor loses a vote, he's sort of tortured. Nobody lasts 4 torture sessions. That's supposed to incentivize, the governor. When he dies, another governor is picked from this council, which does not seem to include the military people actually in charge. And so it seems as if, like, on the one hand, it does present this depiction of democracy, quote unquote, as this sort of partisan exercise that has very little to do with rational arguments, although the rational arguments are made, right? The debates in our systems are made. It's just, nobody really cares. They watch it. They just are like, yeah. I think Trump won. I think Biden won, based on their a priori thinking. But then there's also this way in which, which I think is a case for not necessarily Brexit or Trumpism, but is a case for sort of big suspicion of democracy, that essentially if you substituted these military elites for like oligarchs in either of our countries, the wealthy in either of our countries, they've sort of rigged this system in which these figureheads are put up who do have some limited power, but who ultimately are disposable, ultimately are not really the seat of power. And so you have this pretense, this show of democracy, but the reality is much more a kind of fascistic oligarchy.
Yeah, well, I think you're right, because I think this is, and I loved it because this whole voting part of this I thought was absolutely brilliant. Because the other thing as well is that if the governor, he obviously makes like a proposal, and then you have to vote yes or no on that proposal. That's how this sort of voting system works. And every time it's voted against, like, he is tortured. Like, he has this beam comes down, and it's sort of, it's a DNA disruptor or something. And by 4, I say it kills them. So what that does, though, because don't forget, a proposal is only a proposal. Yes and no to a proposal is only determined by how you word that proposal. And so all that matters is if you really want to, you don't want to get killed. You don't want to be in pain. So then, like you say, you start to be influenced by by what is happening around you. Like you're saying, like those oligarchs or the military that's involved. He's standing up against that. But like there must have been governors that were like, all right, well, I know this is the way that the people want things, because they obviously want that quick, short term satisfaction, or they want some sort of that thing. So they will choose to to word that proposal, so they will always win.
I like what you're getting at. You're sort of getting at like the way that even this version of a kind of corrupted democracy is sort of idyllic, that it presumes that the governor words this in a fair way, and you're imagining a sort of like Boris Johnson who says, all right, on the one hand, we can have Brexit and prosperity, or on the other hand, we can be an irrelevant part of Europe and lose economically. What are you going to vote for? Well, then once the vote comes in, you're held accountable for following that through, but you're not held accountable for all the adjacent promises that you've made. And so you could sort of rig the vote that way. And that's not really contemplated here.
No, but it's sort of by having that beam and stuff, it's sort of almost, it's inferred. You can sort of tell that that's sort of one of the things that's clearly happened. I just thought that was interesting, like saying that, like, no one in this democratic, I say in sort of inverted commas system, like no one is, I don't know, no one is left out of it from a pain point of view. Like it's all negative. Like it shows democracy as being completely negative because the people voting aren't informed enough. They're just given this single sort of 2-line short proposal of what the decision is that needs to be made, and then they get a yes or a no. They're not given the facts, the statistics, the education that goes with that. So it shows that sort of an uneducated voting mass can be problematic for the long run. But then it also shows that sort of like there is massive influence on the people making the proposal. It made me think again, like, I often quote and think about like Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister, sort of especially Humphrey Appleby, the wonderful character. And in that, there's actually a thing about a survey, and it's about conscription. And he sort of says that, do you think, several questions like, do you think the young should be given a purpose in life? Do you think they should be given a vocation? Oh, yes. Okay. Do you think it's bad that they get to hang around on the street? Yes. All right. Well, do you think that the army and military can provide discipline for young people? Yes. Do you think conscription is a good idea? Well, yes. You can't answer yes to all those questions and then say no to the final question. But then you can also say, do you think it's worth basically training the youth of today in the use of weapons? And then there's a series of questions where eventually you can't say yes to conscription. You have to say no to it. And again, like with this, like you see,
do you think that we should abduct the young and take them away from their homes and train them in the use of weapons and train them in effective killing techniques on murder bases?
Yeah, basically.
It's a different question.
It's a different question because then you go, well, no. And again, I feel that this series is almost presenting that, and that the governor you get is trying to be a guy of integrity, and and the people are sort of like not willing to go with that. But you could easily have got someone like a Nixon or a Trump or a Blair or a Johnson or anyone else, and they would be mixing those words and sort of like shimming, so the people would always vote for them because of the way it's been worded, or the fact that they understand the tone of the mass, where it's going to be voted, so they will always lean into that.
The sort of populist thing.
Populist, yes, exactly. That's what I'm trying to get to. I suppose that's the word. It's populism, isn't it? And it sort of shows, really, if you want to go down that channel, that populism is the populist idea is a complete fraud. Because all you're doing is leaning into the will of the uneducated people that don't really know what they want to vote for.
Well, right. Although, here, the idea that people should suffer in the short term, in order to hold out to get a better deal, is obviously the correct answer, right? Within the constraints of this serial. Having said that, there is a kind of, we're interpreting it based on our liberal bias, and I will do so further in a moment. Having said that, that populism would be seen as, say, a government handout. Like, you don't have to suffer, don't worry, we're going to provide you food, and so we'll get a worse price and we'll continue our starvation cycle. This would seem to be an anti-liberal message in which, we're providing an additional handout. The people don't want to suffer. Any government program is hard to take away.
Yep.
That sort of old school conservative message. But I do think, to make the liberal point, I mean, we are living in an era in which democracy polls poorly in both of our countries and in the West in general. And I think that this is fascinating for how it depicts democracy as possible in the midst of essentially a fascist state. Yeah. And of course, this is 85. So, whether it's Thatcher or Reagan, you were talking about populists, but let's not forget Ronald Reagan was a theocrat who absolutely wanted to end Social Security, wanted to, impose a federal abortion ban, wanted to put nothing, ministers, religious people in charge of major things, and did to the full extent that he could. He was absolutely an anti-democratic theocrat. And of course, he's been rehabilitated in certain circles. And I don't think, he was a horrible person who's burning in hell or something like that. But both Thatcher and Reagan do sort of illustrate how, without the current populist trend, how a democratic process can also have these very scary totalitarian elements to it.
Well, no, yeah, you talk about. I mean, I think literally before we started recording, we were actually talking about some things, and I mentioned about the thing that brought down Thatcher was the poll tax. Literally, it was just a sort of like, it got put into power, and the country just sort of went, nope, not doing that, thank you very much, and just refused to pay it for the most part, and it ended up collapsing, becoming unenforceable. That is the same here. It's just a sort of like, we're going to do this, thinks the people are going to accept it, and they just vote no. In that case, the DNA disruptor just managed to sort of, take her out. But it is this sort of, it becomes almost this this weirdly sort of like symbiotic relationship between the governor and the people, though, because his life depends on them voting him to continue. And so, of course, you would lean into sort of giving more populist choices because you want to stay alive. Like, no one's that daft. But what I find interesting is that if going back to the other side, is that couple that you see, like the woman who is all for the government and all for and trusting in the government, votes yes. She agrees to the right answer, which, as you said, is sort of like, well, right, short-term pain for long-term gain. He votes no. But he says to him, "Oh, he's incompetent. He's ordered it," and she says, "Oh, well, yeah, he's just as incompetent. No, he's incompetent. He's as incompetent as." And she says, "The last one." So there's clearly this rhetoric of like, every single one of them is just as bad as the other one. But he votes no just because he doesn't like him, but it turns out like he actually gets hit with it. He loses that vote. But she's not shown to have been choosing that decision because it's the right reason. She chose it because it's what he suggested to do. Because you find out later on that like she is writing what they call a viewer's report. They refer to it as a viewer's report and as a voting report as well. And it's basically going back to this idea of like, I think we've seen it in fiction before, sort of like basically shopping your mates, like, sort of he didn't watch his designated number of hours, or he says about, oh, you just vote, you press twice. They won't know. And she says, well, they will know because I will tell them. So she's not making decisions because she's a good person or because she's an educated person. She's taking it because she's bought into the propaganda and will just do everything that this governor will say. And that includes whether this is her husband or her brother. She will turn him in to the authorities to be, as we will talk about shortly, tortured and executed on live television.
Yeah, well,
so I mean,
we'll get to that. I mean, the dynamics between them, and I took them throughout as just kind of two workers who weren't related, but are just sort of assigned to this together. You're right that neither one of them seems, correct or coming from the right reasons. And I think initially initially, at least for me, you think that the guy is correct because the governor is a fascist leader, right? And you assume, oh, these guys are trying to kill the doctor. His minions are trying to kill the doctor. This guy is a bad guy. And so, if anything, the guy seems, to be making the right vote to get rid of this dictator sort of figure. And then over time, you realize that, no, probably the woman is making the correct vote, but that she's not doing it for enlightened reasons. Having said that, she's right to report him. I mean, he is committing a crime. He's stealing her vote. He's committing election fraud,
No, he's not stealing her vote. He's giving up his vote for her. He's saying, well, you vote for me. I don't care.
No, he goes up at the end and he presses no on both of them, right? He steals her vote.
He presses no and then she presses yes. And then it happens again later on.
Well, but at the end, he presses no, and then he presses no on her side, too.
Oh, okay. I didn't see that bit.
So he still, and then she says, "Oh, I'll report you. You have committed a crime." He has committed a crime, and she's right to report him, albeit that reporting should not result in torture and murder.
But that's the point, isn't it? It's about the.
Right. So she's not right, but
no,
is more right. I don't know. I feel weird.
Well, but that's the thing, isn't it? This whole thing is it does feel weird. Because throughout as well, this couple that they're watching torture on TV, and they're debating at one point about sort of like an execution, and he's going, "I'm sure that was a repeat," and she's like, "No, you're thinking about the blind guy from before. That was the whatever. No, that was definitely a new one." And they're like,
and then there's that wonderful misanthropic joke. Well, he wasn't blind until they started the torture.
Yes, yeah.
That's some gallows humor.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And I think what it's showing is neither of them are right, and neither of them are particularly wrong. Like she is, she's all gung ho. She's bought into the propaganda of this system and the way it works, and so will always support the system. He, however, is basically it appears like he works in the mines or whatever. And so he's browbeaten. He's almost like, look, there's nothing in this for me. I'm tired of doing everything for the grander thing. What's in it for me? And I think he's more just worn out and tired. And so he's just resentful of the entire system. So we'll always vote no because he always hates the system. Because it comes to the end. I mean, we talk about the torture as being a distraction and stuff, and we'll get to that. But one of the, I'm going to skip right to the end because the very final thing you see, it goes back to this couple, and I love that it can keep them consistent. When it's all happened, the doctor does his thing, and it's overthrown, and we'll get to the reasons behind that because they realise the sort of the value of the ore that they're mining. It goes back to this couple, and they say it's all changed. We're free. And he says, what are we? She's like, yes, we're free. And, this. He's like, well, what does that mean? What happens next? And it ends with her just saying, I don't know. And they look worried.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, ooh, and you're off. And I'm just like, hang on. All right. Like, it completely acknowledges the things we've said about the macro terror.
Exactly.
It completely acknowledges this thing where you're like, and the doctor's off, having screwed with this thing again. But I'm like, it's good. He's made the progress. But I like the fact that it completely acknowledges from a worker's point of view, or from the masses point of view, like this change of just this person coming in, floating in, causing havoc and leaving, it leaves a massive wake in its sort of behind it. And I thought that was brilliant. I like that. So I like this couple throughout as a sort of a barometer of what's going on.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you're saying. And it's amazing that the doctor never meets them. They have no role in the plot except to provide that view on how some common people are experiencing this society. And I quite like that. I mean, it's one of the things we complained about in the Macro Terra. I think that ending, it reminds me of, is it The Candidate with Robert Redford, where, he wins and then it's like, well, what do we do now? I love that ending. I do think, we still have the sort of conventional ending of the governor apparently, abolishing not just torture and executions, but injustice. And it's like, well, what is the system you're proposing to replace this? it's not entirely clear. It is a little path that he, can make an instant reform from a totalitarian state to presumably something better overnight. But there's no structure yet.
No,
and that's what they're reacting to is like, well, now, I mean, this is the end of Return of the Jedi, right?
Yes.
I mean, right now you have to build a government. You've overthrown that. That's the hard work. I want to see that movie. Let's
get into this, because there's so many elements. But one of the things is the thing that's been keeping them down, I think, keeping this sort of thing, is they've been trapped on this mining prison planet, and they don't have interstellar travel. They cannot leave this planet, and so the only way they can sort of they trade their ore is with this little sort of I don't know, fishy worm creature that has these sort of bodyguards. A wonderful little character, by the way.
Yeah.
And I like the fact they actually got someone. It's I'm in two minds again. This guy is just have to walk his and he has a sort of physical disability, but he's a wonderful little actor. That's really patronising. He's a wonderful actor. And he relishes his character, and I liked him on screen every time he was on. But I like the fact that he controls the distribution, and he's constantly telling them, well, it's a bit pointless, it's a bit useless. I'm taking it off your hands, if anything. I'm selling it, but I'm almost, it made me think of if you've read the Terry Pratchett books, and you're cut my own throat, Dibbler. Do you know what I mean? Sort of well, I'm doing you a favor, but I'm cutting my own throat by doing this kind of thing. And so they believe that this guy is doing them a favor by getting whatever money he can, but not realizing actually that this is a really valuable, rare mineral. And so he's making gangbusters, as is this other military leader that's making huge amounts of cash out of this. And so it's this manipulation of the sort of supply and demand of distribution versus mining and sourcing and stuff. And so I thought that was fascinating as well. But as you say, once he sort of calls it at the end, and because the Doctor's gone this is a really important ore, I need it for the TARDIS, and there's all these other reasons to have it. It's a really incredible, precious metal, precious stuff. They don't have a means of distribution. I'm still great. So you're going to end. You've just lost your single contract for distribution, and so who else is coming to help you with this?
Yeah, I was confused by that as well. I mean, I think that the basic setup is sort of almost a colonial one, right? Still is part of this alien mining consortium. There are references to others,
yes,
especially one in particular, throughout, that he's sort of paranoid that they've negotiated with. So presumably at the end, there are other mining companies that will be able to come in and begin, distribution. But that's not really shown. And I like that there is this sort of exploitation, and it is a kind of capitalist exploitation with, obviously monopolistic overtones of sort of saying, right, well, we're the United States, and that's our oil, see? You have an independent government, quote unquote, but you're selling it to us, and you're selling it at the prices that we basically extort. Don't worry, your ruling party will be perfectly rich, but your people probably won't do too well. You figure it out. And so I quite like that sort of exploitation there. And also here it's based on being able to deceive them about the value of the Zaiton 7, right? Which is more difficult on our planet, right? They seem to have the ability to transmit to these ships, even if they can't leave the mining colony. Nobody told them, you're sitting on a gold mine, right? This is really valuable. But I like the setup. I did feel that the end is a little convenient, as the Doctor is, confronting Syl, who he leaves to presumably be executed, by the way. But and then still has contacted an invasion fleet. And, this is also sort of good. This is in that same sense of imperialism, right, you're going to pay the price that we want, or we'll just come in and overthrow your puppet government. But then, conveniently, right at that moment, there's a message that says, oh, right, we found another source. This is the one planet in the universe that has this. We found another source of Zyton 7. So as we've launched the invasion fleet, that did seem a little convenient.
Yeah, I agree. But was that a real message, or was that set up by the Doctor?
See, that would be great. I mean, I don't think that there's any implication that it has
No.
been, but if they did that, that would be, as we tend to do, as you tend to do, like fix the script's problems.
Yeah.
That is so easily fixed and would be quite clever.
Because I was a bit confused by that last ending because of that thing where they cancel the invasion fleet because they're like, oh, we found some more. And because straight away I'm like, but the story is now literally devaluing the thing that the Doctor's trying to let them do. Because you've literally undermined their negotiating power because they're like, well, now we have the only Zyton 7. And this mining cost going, oh, no, we found it elsewhere. No, we're good. Thank you. You're too much of a problem to deal with now. Like, it's literally undermined its own ending, which I was a bit confused by.
Right. So,
which is why I thought the message was fake. I was like, it's got to be fake. Otherwise, it makes no sense.
But it's very strange. It doesn't really make sense because, you're right that in a sort of free market economy, the price of Zyton 7 has presumably plunged due to discovering an additional source.
Yeah.
At the same time, I mean, an invasion fleet has been ordered. The discovery of another source then causes the cancel of the fleet. But then you get this additional message that says, well, now that we need to conquer this other planet with Zyton 7, we need a bunch of Zyton 7 to do that, to power our ships. So negotiate Zyton 7 and pay any price, which would seem to negate the negation of the invasion fleet. I mean, if you're so desperate for Zyton 7,
just invade them both.
Invade them first.
Yeah.
It's very strange.
Yeah, and that's why I was sort of, I didn't go back and watch it, but I did watch it and thought like, okay, I've missed something here. That must be a fake message. But like, it's not. Then that's just it's one of those things that we've said about Doctor Who on a couple of occasions. It's sort of gone end clunk. What's it going to be? And then it sort of comes to an end. So yeah, it feels like a bit of a sort of a sticky ending. It feels a clunky ending in some ways. However,
but only with the trading guild, right?
Yes.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, but even so, even with that, I like the fact, like you said, they're using this sort of the exploitation as an idea. There's so many ideas in this. Like, what?
Some are good, some are bad, and I agree with you.
Yeah.
Syl is a great. I mean, he's like a fish dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like a fish dude, man. Like they actually, and you see the prosthetics, but and he's sitting on a vat, but he's got 2 arms and basically like a mermaid, ending to his body. And there's this delightful sequences unfortunately near the end. I thought they should have done this early on, as he forces them to sort of spray him with water, to keep hydrated. I mean, it's so charming. And you're right to point out the handicapped issue, or ableism, but still, I mean, he's a wonderful, but you were going to talk about other things.
No, I was just going to say, you were saying about, some of the ideas that that they've thrown in here, and it's the fact that they've tried that I think I really appreciate. The ending is clunky in that sort of that with that message, and a little confused, but it is the fact that like they've clearly gone, because my understanding of Doctor Who up to this point is. And I even sort of read this as I was sort of doing a bit of research, like, the writing's lackluster, they're running out of ideas, they didn't know what to do, the budgets were down, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I'm watching this, and I'm going like, there's 100 ideas in this, and as you say, not all of them works, but I think the hit rate is actually pretty good. Mm-hmm. I think it looks good, because I think Syl looks great. I think it's a fantastic design, and some of those funny little pieces. I like the fact that they're covering themselves by having this sort of thing of the masses being representing sort of like the values of the people, so the stuff like and so I've read this and kind of like, well, that must have happened later. Like, I don't want to watch the other story, the other serials then, but this actually, I can see why this is held up for this Doctor as a good story. because I was a bit confused, because one of the things I did want to touch on, we'll get onto it, is the entertainment element of this, because this is the other thing about the financing
Yes.
of the planet. And so
Yeah.
and I want to talk about this a little bit. So basically, as you say, sort of part of the punishment and part, that is executions and torture. I mean, there's this beam of light that does this thing, but every execution and every sort of film session of torture is broadcast for people's entertainment, sort of like, sort of Mojo World sort of kind of way of doing things. And or even like The Running Man, sort of like, I'm thinking this has been done a number of times, but I kind of like, the other thing is they've put this thing like the Punishment Dome, where it all sort of takes place. I mean, you see bits and pieces, but the whole thing has got cameras on it, so even every element of this is being watched. So when the doctors and the guys, his companions and stuff, escape, like, it's not that they've gone like, it's not like Batman where they're watching about Batman's about to be executed, it's going on national TV, and when he escapes, it all goes off. Like, no, they run down a corridor. People are still watching this.
Yes.
And they're cutting from camera to camera, and I loved that as a sort of an in as well. That you go back to that couple, they're picking favorites out of this group, and I thought that was brilliant.
They're like, oh, he's dead now. They're just, they're just providing color commentary. I mean, I'm fascinated by the role of sadism in this serial, because it does seem to be really sadistic, and it does sort of expect you as the audience to enjoy it to a certain degree, which is, after all, why it's presented. Now, of course, it's done with, beams of light and rays, as opposed to watching knives go into flesh. But I mean, on a meta level, I love this sort of recognition of like, this is what you're tuning into Doctor Who to see, right? Like, we all know you want monsters murdering people, and that's part of the fun, and getting murdered. But the presentation of it in the serial is very strange, and it does seem to be a sort of, like you said, a sort of conglomeration of ideas, none of which really are fully thought out or work together. Like, so for example, this punishment dome is filled with this, there does seem to be this hallucinogenic technology that they have that comes in multiple times, which is cool. I there's no real explanation for it. And it's linked to this mutation technology that they have, which is daft and terrible stuff. But at least it's tied to the same sort of technology in a way. But, you said this sort of punishment dome area. Why do you have on a mining colony where space is at a premium, a whole area to like release people in and have them deal with traps and hallucinations? And then all of that is broadcast. And yet the military is trying to find them while people are watching their location.
Yes,
and
that was the one thing I was going to bring up. At one point, like, they're being chased down, and then it flicks to the couple watching them, and I'm going like, why didn't the guards just turn the telly on?
Yeah,
it clearly tell them where they are. Well, one of the things that's interesting, and I was actually going to ask this question because it's sort of one of those chicken and egg kind of scenarios. Because at one point the governor actually says, "Oh, we've got a bit of a side hustle going on. We've actually getting quite a lucrative deal in broadcasting these things now, this torture and execution and these other things, on tapes to other planets." So we're actually getting, and the guy says, "Oh well, if you want to help with that," like, Sil actually says, like, "Oh well, we can help with that distribution as well if you really want to." But they've already picking this up. So I actually, in my head, again, I have to have this head canon. And going back to, again, sort of like, it made me think of the torture room in what's the James Woods film?
Videodrome.
Videodrome. There you go.
Yeah.
That idea of sort of starting probably with just simple executions, and that the whole place may have been for a different purpose, and then they've gone like, we've got to up the ratings. We need people to be more interested, and it's escalated since then. And so it probably started with just a single chamber where they're like, they hang people like you see sort of later on with the Doctor. And then later, then it's grown into this just light technology and this sort of other torture. And then it's like the corridors of doom with the hallucinations where they'll see a fly or whatever. And the tendrils and the cannibals and all this other weird stuff. like it's almost it felt like The Running Man,
Yeah.
the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, and the Stephen King book. Like again, this thing of like people tuning in to see people put through the paces as we see happen. And again, like it's this weird meta commentary, isn't it, about what you tuning in to see? And it's one of those odd things where, because films have tried to do this, like the Running Man sort of tries to do it, and there's a film later on with a Stone Cold Steve Austin movie, which name escapes me there, but he ends up on an island, a bit like Battle Royale, and the sort of the or even like the Hunger Games. This idea of betting on people in combat in a sort of an isolated location, that sort of thing, and it's sort of like oh, it's so wrong to watch this. This is terrible to do this, but you've literally tuned into this film to see people blown up and killed in this way. So it becomes this sort of push and pull of morality around this situation, and it does it in this as well, where it's like, yes, it's it's terrible that they are doing this to people and distributing these tapes, and that's why I think the whole punishment dome has been created, or it has grown over time, because you think I think they've been over 200 years, and that's what they're selling. Yet you're still tuning in to watch the Doctor run through corridors and be chased by monsters. So,
well, I mean, I think that I'm reminded of my sort of standard critique of not just action movies, but sort of superhero movies and sort of any violent genre, which is the sort of agreement with the audience, which I find fundamentally a sort of evil agreement not to acknowledge, right? Which is that we're going to watch the terrorists or the bad guys commit these acts, right? I'm going to watch Hannibal Lecter, let's say. I'm going to watch him take people's faces off. I'm going to watch him, eat people. I'm going to watch these horrible, horrible things and clearly enjoy it, because that's what I'm going to see in the movie. But I get to pretend that I'm not enjoying it because I root for the protagonist, and the protagonist wins at the end, and the moral order is restored. And I never have to think about how I'm enjoying this viscerally.
Yeah. Well, this is I would say a better example of this is late 80s slasher horror, where initially you want to see Jason, Michael, Freddy beaten. That's the idea. You want to see. So if you go to watch any of their first appearances from Halloween in '78 through more like Friday the 13th Part 2 and Nightmare on Elm Street, those initial couple are about beating Freddy. That's the point, of beating Jason. But then over time, because the only consistent element is that person, is the antagonist, Freddy, Jason, whatever, there becomes a switch. I mean, it's clear, like it's well documented that Nightmare on Elm Street 3 becomes that switch where all of a sudden it's not about beating Freddy. It's, oh, you are now watching this to enjoy Freddy kill people in unusual and fun dream ways, and the rest of the series becomes that. And you're right, it becomes like the people get set up as dominoes to be killed off.
Yeah.
And
but that's implicit even in horror to begin with, right?
Yes,
I mean,
it is. But it becomes more acknowledged. In the 80s, it was a bit more of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, we know why you're here. Where before, it was a bit more implicit. There was yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, of course, you're right. And I think that, the other thing we should remember is that this is also the era of, as you call them, the video nasties.
Yes.
And, I remember the Faces of Death videos, being able to rent them, and, sort of knowing like this was something illicit to watch, and sort of fake snuff films, stuff like that. So this is potentially responding to that.
I think so. I think again, this is what I'm saying. Like, there's so much in this show, this serial, that I'm just like, oh my god. But yeah, I agree. I think there is this element of, it's taken to the extreme, but this idea of sort of the distraction, extreme, cinema, extreme horror, extreme sort of violence being this thing. But even at one point, even the guy worker in the couple actually acknowledges it. Like he's having a nap, which is why he's not viewing, and he actually says like, "I'm just bored. It's just a distraction. Like, it doesn't mean anything." And again, I think again, not only is it sort of a poke at, as you say, like the video nasties and this sort of implicit meta knowledge that actually you're watching this show because of the adventure, the thrills of it, but also this idea that like TV in and of itself, and this is the bizarreness, like this is the whole thing. Sometimes there's episodes of like Black Mirror that does this, like TV shows and television is just a distraction from the real things that are going on in the world. Don't be distracted by television. Go and face into the world, but also watch television so that we can have a budget to make these TV shows. Because I have a job in television.
Yes.
And it becomes that sort of weird. And I think there's that as well, where it's sort of like it acknowledges that television is a distraction from the action. What government is actually doing.
Well, and I think that we shouldn't ignore the political element of this. That the television, these murders, these executions, which metaphorically stand in for Doctor Who and video nasties, but also Doctor Who and other stuff, have a function of bread and circuses for the population. Yes. And I often think about that function, especially today when we have a plethora of streaming options. I mean, the average person in the West has access to more media than existed even 30 years ago. Can you imagine being in the not just the Middle Ages, but being in like the 1800s and having to read a book by candlelight, after it's dark outside, this is what we have. So we have all of this entertainment, and sometimes I quite admire the people who are honest about it and will say like, yeah, I don't know that the Marvel movies are good movies, but what I do know is I work 8 hours at a job that I hate, where my boss demoralizes me and I know I'm not valued, and I come home and what I really want to watch is Iron Man beat up Thanos, and hey, that's the ultimate trump card. Like, I'll shut up. like that's awesome. Everybody should like what they like, but it does serve this kind of function of, I don't believe in democracy anymore. I feel powerless over income inequality. I don't believe that I will ever own a house. And I know that it will be even worse for my children. I can't get an education without paying for it for the rest of my life. All of this sucks, and I have no idea how to fix it. And we live in oligarchical states. On the other hand, I'm going to come home and watch Netflix and binge something.
Yeah.
So I do think that element is here too.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's totally what it is. Like he says it. Like the worker guy says, like, look, I'm exhausted. I've been working all day in the mine. Like, I just want to I want to just Netflix and chill. And she's like, no, thank you.
Who doesn't want to come home and just watch some good old fashioned torture?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm an American. That's in my blood.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's it. But the blood comes from the British, so we started it. So. Who invented, internment camps? We did.
Well, you guys used to have bear baiting,
Yeah, well, yes, we did. We did. I'm from Coventry, and Coventry's right next to Warwickshire. Beautiful, beautiful town, wonderful county. And their emblem is a bear strapped to a post with a chain. So.
It's a little on the nose.
Oh yeah, well no, yeah, it's been there for millennia. So, people look at that and go, "Oh, that's fascinating." You go, "Yeah, it's got a history," but
it's not so cute in practice.
Yeah, let's go back like I mean, to be fair, we're talking 1,500 years.
Yeah,
this is
I know,
long time, but
well, and people, there are cultures that still do this, but we the other thing I wanted to say about this torture as entertainment thing is it is amazing to me when we're talking about how dark this serial is, how it is just assumed that everybody finds this entertaining. Like, there is never a word spoken against this as entertainment. There are words spoken against torture and execution as commonplace, and you see people who protest they're innocent going to die. But the idea that something is wrong with your brain if you enjoy watching sadistically somebody being tortured is never mentioned. The doctor and his companions never voiced that. Syl, I mean, who is an alien? I mean, to me, it's like there's got to be something weird about, like, would we enjoy watching Syl's weird species being tortured and killed? Probably not as much as we would humans, right? That would be a little strange. But he just relishes these videos, and the idea that, every alien species just enjoys videos of sadism and murder is never questioned. And I find this sort of, maybe it should, I think it probably should be questioned, but there is this really dark way in which the serial just absolutely assumes everybody is a sadist when it comes right down to it.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, I like them. You're right. I mean, you know, you could put in something like, you know, this is all they've, you know, this that thing, like this is all they've known. That's, you know, this is all they've known on the on Varos. So you can probably excuse that. But yeah, but then the moment that Syl learns about it, the sort of like the relish is a really good word for it. Like, yeah, his reaction of like, really, you've got videos of torture? Oh, get me some of that. Yeah, like. It's a visceral reaction when he's all like he's like physically excited, and you're like, hey, that's weird. That's just weird. Like, but it's also, like you said, the fact that it's becoming, as the governor says, like a lucrative income stream for them. And so, you know, this governor that is set up to be a figure of good. By the end of the show, by the end of the serial, it's still going like, yeah, no, I'm making a fortune off torturing these rebels and stuff, and it's actually a really good income stream for us. It's, you know, it's probably more stable than this mining stuff that we're being conned out of. If there's going to be a period where the mining contracts are going to fall out of favor, you know, they're going to have to renegotiate. They're going to have to kind of, like, you know, before they can make any money off it. That might be the only income stream that they've got.
Well, and I know I'm reading too much into this, but does this not remind you of the transition to a service economy? Especially because it's mining. And both of our countries have, you know, segments of the population that are miners that are losing their jobs as we transition away from coal, and, you know, can do mining through things like blowing up entire mountainsides more cheaply, and for some reason, God knows why, that's legal. But, you know, you have these miners saying, well, what's going to happen? How are we going to transition to a service economy? And it does, I mean, I know I'm overthinking this perhaps, but it does seem like this transition from, I mean, that service from a Zeiton 7 mining camp to a exporting of media, right? To, you know, we're the Hollywood of outer space. It's just that we specialize in torture and execution.
It's Mojo World. But you're right. And also, let's not forget 1985. We've had the miners' riots. Before this, Thatcher's been closing down the coal mines. You know, so no, mining in this country obviously was a big controversial topic up until around this point. So for them to be, I don't think you're reading too much into it at all. This idea of miners having, you know, firstly, miners being duped into the value of their contribution and their sort of their resource, but then also this idea of something being taken away from them and not having stability or assurance in the future. Like, what happens now? No, I don't know. Like, I've been, you know, I vaguely remember sort of these, you know, I know people that, one of my guy's friends, you know, he's got a Welsh family, and they sort of, he's told stories of like in this time when he was a kid, and they were like, yeah, we have no idea what's going to happen next. You know, this is what we've been doing for generations in this part of town, you know, this part of the country. Like, this is, you know, it's a cliche in some of these times, you know, we've seen it and we've talked about it in some films and stuff, where like a sawmill or a coal mine or a steel mill is the sort of the lifeblood of a town, and then shuts down and that town dies. But that's real. That happened. And
it's still happening. I mean, Look at Detroit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, an industry leaves. Coventry was the same. You know, it rebuilt after all, but like an industry leaves a town or a city, like that's its lifeblood.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see that, I think, being played out in this serial.
Well, I
In
like the
that,
idea that at the end, what's going to happen is they're going to say, right, torture and execution have been outlawed. We now have a just society. On the other hand, the Zeiton 7 has been undermined by finding other things. What could we do? Well, yeah, let's bring that torture back. We'll just select the people who we now think deserve it, and we'll export torture videos, and they go right back to
yeah,
torture being an everyday occurrence.
yeah. Oh, look, it will be incremental, and I don't think it will go other ways, because there'll be that thing of like, well, we can't torture and we can't torture and kill everybody. But there aren't murderers. Well, yeah, it's that sort of Monty Python-esque thing, isn't it? Well, yeah, well, of course, murderers, but rapists and rapists, totally, you can murder those, or they can be executed. Yeah, we can do those. And then basically they form a list, don't they? They draw a line, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, parking tickets. Well, there's lots of them. Parking. Yeah, no,
Well, they
that's
have done
terrible.
something wrong. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And the other thing I would say is, as well, if they are willing to sort of if this reaction of humans being tortured and killed sells well, and this is just coming to mind now, maybe it's sort of like these things happen in society, there would be that question of going, well, what else can we do? What else can we videotape? What else can we produce? And they go, well, I hear pornography is doing well as well. Let's try that. Yeah, this becomes a vice capital. This is basically sort of like Varos. Oh, again, I want the Doctor. This is what I want. I want this to be like a recap. The Doctor comes back in its next incarnation to all these planets, and Varos is basically sort of like some really like seedy media corporation that just sort of puts out filth, and is actually run by James Woods. Like that's what.
Well, we could even call it Vice on Varos.
Oh yes, there you go. That's the sequel I want. Vice on Varos. Because it's true, like I say, that's what would happen. They've still got to have an income. They've still got an income stream, and that incremental sort of like pushing of the line would keep happening. Yeah,
they could. I mean, and at some point, the Zeiton 7 is going to be exhausted, or you're going to begin to mine it less, knowing that you're exporting less and therefore driving the price up, and can keep that price elevated for a longer time if you're smart. Right. So you've got to find another sector to go into.
Well, and there you go. That's the new Trek version of this. Would be like, well, mining's not sustainable, is it? And it's killing the planet of Varos. So what else can you do? And they'd be like, titties, and that'd be it. That'd be the end of the episode. I don't know. It's one of those things like going back to the Macra Terror. The more I think about it, the end of this is sort of like the Doctor swoops in, makes some changes, and swoops out again, and you're still going like, you've just caused massive social chaos. There's going to be riots, and there's going to be food riots. There's going to be they're all, one of the things that's interesting. They're all underground as well. Like this is mentioned twice. So they're all underground. This whole thing is underground. This whole facility. Okay, well, there's going to be ventilation. There's going to be air problems. So, like, okay, if they can't afford stuff and things start breaking down, and it just, I was like, this sort of, I get that it's leaving on a positive note. But again, as you and I keep saying, like, all I keep seeing is like, I want to see the follow up. What happens next?
Right, the Wrath of Khan.
Yes.
Well, yeah, no, I'm with you. And the other thing I think about along those same lines.
There you go.
Right, indeed. But the other thing I think about is how, although this does a better job of at least admitting that they're left sort of nowhere, that we like to imagine these totalitarian states or things that we object to politically or in a society as sort of arbitrary, that they arise out of nothing and they are arbitrary cultural institutions that can just be gotten rid of. at least this acknowledges, right, this is, the whole government system, what replaces it. But, in the same way that I think about, the failure of Star Wars in the wake of Empire Strikes, Return of the Jedi, to envision the building of a government, right? It's far easier to destroy one. I think it's important for, one of the things that I always point out to people when they talk about, like, well, why do we do it this way? It's not fair that I should have to, pay this tax or fill out this form to get this assistance from the government, or, that college is run this way, or whatever else. I think, or healthcare, I think, all right, well, you might be right, but this system evolved for these reasons. They evolved historically. These are not accidents. And I think understanding that these are not arbitrary things that exist out of time and space, it's just, somebody took over. Well, probably at some point, having a totalitarian ruler made sense. Having, this entertainment made sense. These are institutions that evolved for reasons other than one person decided it should be so.
Yeah.
And so I like any depiction of culture that shows it as predicated upon a set of historical precedents and a set of historical assumptions that then acquires a weight of its own. And the solutions have to then be predicated upon the past, a continuity with those past and with those circumstances. Because I'm often bothered by this sort of assumption that these are just arbitrary institutions, or, why do we do it this way? And then everybody comes in and tries to make the same changes that the last generation made and gets the same explanations. I mean, you see this in companies too, where it's like, yeah, we tried that. We've had this discussion. I've been here long enough to remember this discussion of doing it exactly this different way.
Yeah, and that's a really good point actually within an organisation. Because I've been in those meetings where you get some sort of like someone who comes into the business fresh faced and all that other stuff, and it's like, I've got this idea, we want to do this, and everyone sort of looks at each other and goes, yeah, no, we tried that, it wasn't sustainable, didn't work, and they go, no, you're not understanding me. I want to do this and this, and you go like, yeah, no, we do understand you. There's a reason that this sort of like we have to do it this way, whether it be budgetary or resource or whatever. Like, it's a pipe dream. We might get there, but we can't do it now. But again, like, you say about sort of coming in and changing things without having that, that government or that structure. I mean, look at the 20th century, post World War One, the rest of Europe sort of goes like, right, penalise Germany. We're going to take it out, the Kaiser's gone, and we're going to bring in this sort of, this is how it's going to be run. And it results in, the rise of fascism. It results in sort of World War Two. Following World War Two, we sort of learn a lesson a little bit, but we end up literally splitting Germany in half. America, Britain, and others sort of like literally, not so much invade, but sort of like act as an arbitrary police force for Japan. And that has consequences, and some good, some bad. I mean, you look at it now, sort of almost 100 years, or 80 years, hence now, and they've recovered, both those countries, to an extent. But the pain that followed those events, and I think it's interesting that sort of like, that change is painful. And this episode sort of has that dour note at the end of like, yeah, change from the norm is gonna be painful, and it's gonna be difficult.
Especially big change like that.
Yeah, and so I kind of like you say, I love that they acknowledge it, but it's still that you referred to sort of the Doctor as that Han Solo kind of character, that almost swashbuckling in his sort of like multicolored dream coat. But that becomes more of a problem, because it's like swashbuckling in, cause the problem, or solve the problem, as it were, and then swashbuckle out again. And you get that savior mentality, but like there's still the work to do to make sure people are provided for and that sort of thing.
So I do feel compelled to point out that my understanding of the Treaty of Versailles is that it was not historically bad for Germany compared to most treaties, post-war treaties, and that the rise of Hitler probably had more to do with the economy. But even
That's
then,
definitely true. Yeah.
but even then, now right when you're burning Deutschmarks, for heat, but which is still traumatizing. I mean, hence the German savings rate. But and of course now we're seeing like rise of fascism in countries where the whole theory was like, wait, where's the economic collapse? No,
Well,
this is just because you feel like it.
Yeah, the thing with the Treaty of Versailles was it was less about economic collapse, but it sort of led to something. And obviously, the 1929, but it was before that their economy collapsed. But it was a big part of it. But it was about national embarrassment. That was the point of Versailles. It was about nationally embarrassing the Germans, and that was the biggest stinger. Was for them to be sort of like held up as an example of like basically you don't mess with the rest of Europe and the sort of and we as Britain in particular were very sort of proud to kick the crap out of them for a while after the war.
Rub their face in it a little.
Exactly, totally. Yeah. And that was the biggest problem, was it sort of like it wasn't just a slap on the wrist or anything. It continued to we continued to take resources and everything out of that country for close to a decade after the war.
Yeah. But I mean, of course, that's normal.
Yeah.
But but I mean, I take your point, and how these things are always historically contingent, and I mean, the other thing that I found myself thinking as you were talking is that this sense of the swashbuckling sort of imperialists coming in and saying, now here obviously there are elements such as the governor that don't like the current system, right, or have problems with it, but I mean, of course, he doesn't totally realize what's going on yet. But the swashbuckling imperialist comes in and quote unquote solves the problems, right?
Yes.
Except it's the people who have to create another government and really solve those problems long term. And then I find myself thinking, every nation state or every government is a dystopia to somebody. It's a sort of sliding scale. And we were talking beforehand about like sort of cultural values and how the difference, how I draw a line between, say, war crimes and, making women wear veils, right?
Yeah.
Which I object to, but which I don't think, abrogate a nation's sovereignty the way war crimes do. And there's this debate, and I think it's a continuing, evolving discussion about where we draw those lines. But, you can easily imagine, and we are in a scenario whereby, all right, gassing your own people, clearly the doctor comes in, solves that problem. But, go forward a few generations, why are your women veiled? We need to solve this problem too. And it becomes this sort of sliding scale.
No, I agree. Again, we talked about that with regards to sort of like the use of nuclear weapons, wasn't it? Like, at what point are you looking to activate that nuclear deterrent? Not for veils. Obviously, that wasn't what we were saying at all, just to be clear.
That was the one thing we agreed on, is veiling women gets you nuked.
Yes.
Because nothing helps veiled people forced to be veiled and into arranged marriages like nuclear Armageddon.
That's right, exactly. Yeah, puts everyone on an equal playing field. Then
sometimes you have to raise the village to save it, brother.
Yes, raise the world at that point. But one of the points we were making is like, the Doctor is almost like that nuclear option, isn't it? Because he just comes in, blows everything up, and leaves, and you're sort of like, okay, well now in the sort of the aftermath of that, we've now got to pick something together that's going to work in the short term and in the long term. And one of the things I've learned in many cases is your long-term solution will often be dictated by your short-term, the success of your short-term solution.
Expand on that.
So, if for example, I'll use a technology example, and then I'll expand on that. if you were going to deploy a brand new system, so someone is very, very used to using a system at work, a piece of technology, a piece of software, and you say, we're going to give you a brand new system. This brand new software is going to come in, but we're going to deliver it in bits and pieces. And so you're going to get this piece first. Okay, so short-term solution, it will get better in the future. We have this much grander sort of solution. And if what you give them is harder to work with, clunkier, less reliable than what it is they're actually working with at the moment, then their instant response is going to be, this is crap, I don't want to work with it, I don't like it, you're making my job harder. And all you're saying is, but the future's going to be better, the future's going to be better. Look, we're going to give you this thing we've now put in place is going to be refined and it's going to be made better. But all they're seeing is what is in front of them. So all they're seeing is like, well, all you're telling me is I'm stuck with this and you're going to make it slightly better. I don't like it. And so they sort of push back against it. But what you're telling them is actually you are going to get a fantastic system, a fan-dabby-dozy system. But it's going to take this, we've got to go on this journey. It's going to take me 6 months to deploy to the end product. But they've got to live through that 6 months of pain. Right. And so by the time you get to the end of that, yes, they will have a fantastic system. They'll have a slick system that can work. But the problem is they hate it. And they will tell you everything wrong with it because they've had to live with that growth. And that's just through experience. And I feel the same would be the case here. Like they've gone, yeah, what we had before wasn't great, but I got fed and I had reliable work. I had all this, I was used to it. It's what I grew up with. I knew it. Now I've had to live with 2 years, 3 years of real austerity and real pain. And you're telling me there's something better in the future. But I don't want the future. I want now. And I can imagine there being that. The problem is that thing then that you're then looking at in the future becomes quicker because you get them people going, you've got to make this faster. So you start to cut corners, or you scope things. All right. Well, look, what's a phrase any developer and project manager is going to fear is minimum viable product. What's the minimum viable product that we can deploy for people to be able to do the job they've got to do?
Yeah.
And that's
I know this in tech, right?
Yeah, exactly. So what you do is you drop something, everyone goes, it's a piece of crap. And you go, yeah, but it allows you to do what you've got to do. Yeah, it does, but it's still crap. And then you've got to build on it. It takes time, but it forms resentment. And I can imagine in this situation, like the doctor, off he goes, womp, womp, tide is off. And they're going to go, minimum viable product is, right, as we say, we're not going to do torture and executions, but we've got to get back down the mines, and we've got to sort of push these contracts. But we still got this gap. Okay, well we'll only distribute the death or the execution and torture of murderers and rapists. That becomes this model. Do you know what I mean? And that becomes the minimum viable product to get us past this situation, and then that becomes the norm. And then you get the choice of going, do I still go for the end product we agreed at the very, very beginning, which is the slick, flashy system, or this works and actually we can just keep to build this, and you go off on a completely different tangent and you end up somewhere else.
Right.
And that's
absolutely.
That's what I see coming out of these things.
Well, I definitely agree this is heading towards some sort of vice world scenario. Yeah. Just because that's so delicious and entertaining. But I would sort of imagine that because they have realized the ore's value, that they have some way of getting. I mean, they're going to get this immediate. I mean, with this absurd resolution, they're going to get $20, 20 credits per unit for this ore. So they're going to get a boost to their economy. They're going to get presumably have competition for selling this, and they're going to have. So I don't imagine they're going to be facing a financial crisis right away. They will face a governmental crisis, and so what it seems to me is it's like the oil curse, right? Like when you have natural resources, you get a totalitarian state. It's very strange, but it does work. It does seem to happen. That this governor, he's a good guy, but everybody in his government are people who worked for a horribly corrupt state that they're all ready to kill him because everything they're used to is I did kind of like the execution of the governor is kind of like a parallel to sometimes you go through prime ministers quite quickly, and so
Yes.
I think about like Japan. It's like yeah, we're just gonna go through these guys.
Yeah.
But so I sort of imagine that there's got to be some kind of like purge of this government if he is going to hold on and he is going to steer his society, in the right way. That means you're going to keep these sadists out of power. The only way you're going to do that is sort of purge this government, and then you can try some systems of emancipation or meritocracy where people can rise up and you get rid of this caste system. But eventually that ore is going to dry up, and at this point you have a totalitarian state where now you have rebels against your state, and your morals are like, well, I overthrew the regime that was murdering those rebels. And I don't understand why all these totalitarian states have tons of rebels left and right. But I don't like that. On the other hand, they're rebels against me now, and what I'm doing is very tenuous. And we could make some money.
Yeah.
I
know you mentioned the rebels. You're right though, and that's the thing, isn't it? It's sort of that because I'm trying to think like who is killed or who is outed at the end. You've got the bald guy with the mustache. You've got the guy in the mask who's half mutated and this other stuff. Fine, they're sort of like your Goebbels and your sort of like that sort of level. But then below them, you've still got people that fully support and work in that government. They'll be like, yeah, no, I like my job. I'm happy in this position. Stop messing with the system. That are going to try and sort of go against this thingy. And again, like, to one of the things I think that's interesting that's not really touched on, you sort of have this character, but often when you have these change of government kind of scenarios in a film or TV show, you have the potential alternate leader, to form that balance. Thinking of like Demolition Man, you've got the Edgar Friendly character sort of against the Dr. Cocteau, and when Dr. Cocteau's taken out, you've got this sort of like that whole idea of sort of how Stallone even says that you get yourselves you get a lot clean, you get you a little bit dirty, you'll figure it out. Like it's a meeting of two forces to sort of come to a compromise or come to an agreement.
Synthesis.
Yeah, and you see that in others, like where there's an overthrow. There's like even in Star Wars, like yes, Luke is obviously now been held up as in some ways as Jedi, but even Leia is she's actually a part of a former government. So like she can go back and reform the Senate and all this other stuff. Like it's sort of like you have the potential for an alternate. There's an avenue to an alternate. Here, there doesn't appear to be one. They just sort of leave the governor, and the governor's gone, oh well, yeah, complete change of conscience. Yeah, you're right. This is terrible. Although he didn't seem particularly perturbed by doing it all less than 20 minutes ago. And so, yeah, but they don't have that. There's a rebel saved, the blonde guy and his blonde partner, I forget the names, but they're never held up as being sort of like, these are your alternate leaders. They are the sort of the leaders of the resistance. They're the leaders of the rebel force.
No, they're not. They're just guys.
Yeah. And so I find it interesting that there is no alternate ideology or alternate sort of government structure being proposed. There's just what's left.
Right. Well, I mean, I would say the governor, obviously he has administrative experience, right? And he does seem wise, and I think that's what we're left with is saying, well, he's already in power. He's going to stay in power and just not be accountable to these military leaders anymore, and not. I mean, also, people are going to point out getting rid of torture and execution really benefits you. You were on your fourth torture session, which is the guaranteed death. How convenient. You are a failed leader who was lucky to survive 3 and managed to overthrow the system before the 4th. And it does seem to me the only functionary who he seems to have, who's pointed to, is the guy who was potentially in the pool for becoming the next governor, who lets him go and really goes out on a limb for him. So, okay, but that guy presumably has some level of experience, some level of knowledge that he would be capable of stepping in for the governor. But his only recommendation is that he was willing to go against the state. That doesn't seem to be a great recommendation. And it's not at all clear that there are any functionaries or anyone able to run this government. And so you get that sort of like denazification period, where or de-Baathification in Iraq, right? Where you say, okay, if we get rid of everybody who's a member of the Ba'ath Party, who the hell is going to run this?
Yeah.
And then if we don't, we've got murderers or people who certainly collaborated, running this government. And where does that end up leaving you? I mean, this is not going to be an easy process, and it's going to be a process that's going to. I mean, those guys who you saved, who were rebels, are probably going to wind up being rebels again within a few months.
Yeah, Or like you say, or if they swing too far, as I said, there's the people that were part of the government, but functionaries or soldiers within the government become the rebels. You just sort of switch camps. So yeah, no, it is. It's interesting that whenever we have these ones of the Doctor going off to a planet to do something, it does become this sort of slightly white savior-ish, but like does seem to be like I've put you on the correct course, and I'm sure that they can find their way. I mean, this is all sort of it's one of those things that like Star Trek resolved this with the was it the prime directive? Mm-hmm. They ignored it a large chunk of the time.
Yes.
But that was always the point, wasn't it? Sort of like, it's a burgeoning civilization. We can't really interfere in the way they manage their government. But they had the same problem all the time, where they'd resolve a problem, of racial disparity or war or something, and then, But at least with those, with Star Trek, there was often the sort of the inclination of, but you've got the Federation backing it up that can come and check on them and provide them with trade or can provide them with sort of like support. So it wasn't just sort of like, Kirk out and he'd off he'd go. It would be like, well, we've helped you resolve the problem. Now you can be a part of the Federation, or you can, if you wish to trade with us or do whatever, like form a relationship with the Federation, it's there for you to do.
Well, and I think Star Trek tends to say, even in those, you're right that the Federation can back it up, but it also tends to say this is a long process, right? Kirk or Picard will say, look, at least they have a chance, and it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be fast. But Star Trek tends to take that view of what will this planet or the civilization look like over the course of centuries, as opposed to, all right, good luck right now.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it can be difficult to, follow the Prime Directive or not. But even like I was thinking of like a Taste of Armageddon, where that ends exactly like this ends, where this is the one with the warring planets that instead of actually firing the weapons, go into disintegration chambers. And Kirk at the end has that wonderful speech, you've made death too easy, you've made war too civilized. And it's terrible what he's done, right? Like this is, it's not at all clear. But even there, it ends with like, yeah, we don't know, but at least they'll have to figure this out. And they won't have this refuge, this crux, this crutch that allows for the situation to continue, but is perfectly acknowledged. Like, no, they might annihilate each other.
Yeah.
Like, there's no pretense that, oh yeah, everything's fine now. So I do like that about Trek.
Yeah.
And
But,
this does a little bit of that at the end. This is better than Macro Terror for that.
Oh, most definitely. Yeah, this is an improvement on Macro Terror on many levels. So yeah, no, I just find it interesting, like I say, that it does it. It sort of addresses those issues, and introduces those elements to sort of say, this is I don't know, like this is problematic. This is, and then sort of like we can resolve it, but like like you said, that sort of little ending, the sort of little the little epilogue that you get actually is a really sort of an interesting piece.
Yeah, indeed.
One of the things we haven't talked about actually, because I think this thing is so interesting. And I think what I would say is I think we were slightly differing on the last on the Fifth Doctor sort of story.
Mm.
There were some elements I really liked that. There was others I didn't, but I'm much more into this one. However, one of the things I find interesting, or that is interesting, is the Doctor.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't really sort of spoken about Colin Baker's Doctor. We've mentioned being a bit more swashbuckling. He's got that, that sort of thing. He sort of seems slightly inconsistent throughout this story. The start of the show is that the TARDIS has run out of power and is drifting, and he sort of just seems sort of forlorn. He's like, oh well, that's it, sort of given up in a weird kind of way. And Perry, his assistant or companion, sort of finds the TARDIS manual, which I thought was an interesting little twist. So I started reading that at one point, got bored, sort of thing. But like he makes this really odd comment of like, she sort of lists these things that he's done wrong. Burnt dinner, got lost, broken this, broken that. But then when they are broken, and he says, well, I do feel bad for you, but I feel worse for me. Like, you're going to die, you're going to age and die one lifetime. I'm going to continue to regenerate and just be lost here for sort of however long. And he just seems so sort of like, I don't know, self-pitying in this moment that like, I've never seen any Doctor, because every other Doctor just sort of like, well, it may not be that. Let's jump to and try something and do something, or but like rummage around in a box and find something, or go off and do like. He just seems so easily defeatist in this opening section, and then Perry comes up with this idea and notion, and then he's like, oh yeah, we can go to this place and we can use the backup energy to get us to this place, and hopefully we'll get to the right period. And then when he gets there, he sort of seems a little bit more engaged with things.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems so inconsistent across the sort of series of like how he works. I was a bit sort of like, I'm never supportive of the Doctor. Like, I'm finding the story interesting, but I'm sort of finding the Doctor really inconsistent. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I was also shocked by the Doctor's sort of passivity there, sort of resigned to death. And I am troubled. I wanted to return to this too, but also to talk about the depiction of the TARDIS specifically. I like the Doctor having personally, the Doctor being morally ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
I like the Doctor being sort of alien and strange. I like different presentations, right? Which is, part of why I dug the last serial more than you did. I like the TARDIS being used as a refugee possibility to get multiple people out. I mean, this is like, yeah, you've got this. You should have thought of this. Here, the presentation of the Doctor is sort of passive in that way. I don't like. I mean, I don't know. It doesn't seem like the Doctor to me, but I'm not against it as a different depiction. I'm more troubled by the presentation of the TARDIS. Like, I like that it's stolen by the regime and they're using lasers to try to penetrate it, right?
Yeah.
But I dig that, but I don't. This manual is like, a thick printed manual that's clearly, in like cheap binding. I like the idea that there is. I always like when they show more space inside the TARDIS, and or like, no, this is really big, right? Which happens very rarely. But I like even dialogue that suggests that. But I don't like the manual, and I don't like that it's suddenly out of power, and that it needs this ore. It's like this all of a sudden, after 22 seasons, the TARDIS needs dilithium to function. It's very strange to me.
No, I agree with that. Like, this is one, and it's never mentioned again. Like, this ore is never mentioned again. The manual in particular sort of bothered me because it also, like, you have a car. We've all had a car where, in a new car in particular, you open the glove box, or there'll be a little drawer under the passenger seat, and there will be your owner's manual, and it'll tell you how to use the radio and change the bulbs and all these basic sort of functioning things. And then to know that there's something like that for the TARDIS, and it's just under the console. It's literally in a cupboard just under the console. Is so
jarring.
Yeah, it really is. I agree. And and Perry just sort of finds it, and she's like, "What about this?" And he's sort of like, "Wow, I started to read it," and you're just like, it feels so out of character.
Well, where was that manual for 22 seasons? Yeah. Right? As every single Doctor has like, "Oh, I think this will work," and flip switches, and the TARDIS is always misbehaving in some way or another. Right? Did you know you had this manual there? I mean, did nobody else find this?
No. It seems like one of those offhand. It was created for like a one-off joke, and it just doesn't. The fact is, it just doesn't work. Having watched, especially actually talking again about the Fifth Doctor. What was her name? The companion that stays on the ship. Begins with a V. I forget her name. She's clearly capable of sort of flying the TARDIS. And so I'm like, I was thinking, did she read the manual? Like, is it just a thing that some companions find it and go, "Oh yeah, I got this. I'll read this through." Like, I don't know. It feels like you say, it's jarring. Is a good word. Like the whole sort of this whole section with the Doctor until they get to the planet Varos is so sort of weirdly out of character. It just didn't. I was instantly like, "Oh, I don't like this. I don't like this iteration. I don't like this regeneration. It's straight away not working for me." However, there are moments later on when I find some of his line delivery quite humorous or quite good. I think some of it's quite good. Like, there's a moment where they're talking about what's the ore called again?
Something
like Vitron 7 or whatever it's called. Yeah. And he says, like, Zyton 7. And one of the rebels sort of says, "Well, no one wants it." And he said, "Well, I could do with a little bit," sort of. He makes a joke about it. He could easily be saying he obviously does sort of break down the thing, but straight away he could be saying to the rebels there, "What do you mean no one wants it?" Like you said, like, it's just a really important ore, like for space travel, like it's massively important.
That was strange too, right?
Yeah. And so he sort of, it's not even that he holds back information. He just doesn't say things. Like, this isn't some sort of like Machiavellian plot of him holding back information to reveal it later. He just sort of just doesn't think to say it. Like,
yeah, and you seem to think. I mean, I found myself thinking, is he holding that back to get this at a cheaper price? I mean, to be able to say, like, "Hey, that thing that you think is so valueless that you mine, I could really use some, or else I'm stranded in time and space." But as you say, he just doesn't share that, and that would change the plot. I mean, he's perfectly capable of just saying, "By the way, that's really valuable. I could use some." But the other thing that's strange is that there is this line about temporal ships and how that powers the temporal ships that other, that Syl species are using and presumably other species are using as well. Where are those temporal ships? Does that mean there's a whole bunch of time traveling ships? In which case, just travel into the past and, take over Varos, 30 years ago or 300 years ago.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it was sort of a drop line and it sort of stumped me. And I actually was like, I may have misheard that. But no, they do. They say temporal ships, don't they? As in, like, there are other species that have this ability to time travel. So, yeah, I don't know. That's, again, it's sort of like, one of the things we've said before is like the lore at this point is inconsistent. They're not thinking about it in that sense. But the other thing as well, the Doctor does is there's a control panel. Like, I think it's going to be, there's a machine that's turning Perry and the rebel woman into transmutation kind of things.
God.
And that the Doctor's, this guy's like, "It could be any one of these switches, Doctor." And the Doctor basically sort of just pulls out a gun and shoots it all. And again, I'm like, oh, like, there's no clever get out. There's no sort of like deduction and sort of like him showing off. Like, and again, maybe this is because I'm so used to New Who that, like, I would expect, like, David Tennant or Matt Smith or Capaldi to jump forward and be like, well, I can tell you this, and they do some massive spiel of dancing around and waving their arms and wiggling their ears and whatever, and all of a sudden just flicking a switch at the last minute and it being solved. In this, he just shoots it. And it sort of felt so sort of like almost anticlimactic that I'm just like, oh, fair enough.
Well, I think today, that might happen what you described, but it also might be that the Doctor waves the Sonic and,
Yes.
shuts it off. It seems strange to see the Doctor shooting so many guns.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I sort of like the swashbuckling Doctor. I like the, first of all, it is influential. I mean, obviously, the Doctor is going to become a predominantly younger Doctor than the average of the original series. Television has shifted more toward younger actors and toward more swashbuckling adventures. So, I mean, this is the future we're looking at, even if it gets some stuff wrong. And I kind of like, I was reminded again and again of Han Solo shooting first, right? There is a little bit of a rogue to the Doctor.
Yeah.
And I rather like that, but I don't think that it's used to the degree that I would like. I mean, I would like others to question him, right? And to say, surely, you could have killed them both, right? Well, they were going to die anyway, so I just shot the machine, It's like, oh, okay, well, you were willing to kill these people or risk it. Well, right. I think there's ways of doing that and underlining the way in which he is ready to give up at the beginning or any of these things and underlining them and making the Doctor seem more alien or amoral or extra swashbuckling, to just make that clear to the audience that, hey, we know what we're doing. And this is a different Doctor, and you're supposed to be a little disturbed by this.
Yeah, actually, I think that would be more interesting if he was a bit more consistent in that. If he was a bit more consistent in his inconsistencies, if that makes sense. Like you say, yeah, he would be a bit more alien and a bit more. It would feel a part of the character rather than story requires this to happen. He's not bad. He's not terrible. I honestly don't think he's the worst Doctor we've had. I'm not wholly taken with it, but the more I watch and I think back, I'm like, they've all got something I kind of like. There's always something I'm kind of enjoying. I want to sort of flip on something else. There was something else I kind of liked, which is a weird sort of drip line. They also have this sort of transmogrification beam thing for whatever purpose. And again, it's these ideas that seem to be coming up that have no purpose other than sort of to provide something. So they are extracting something from the minds to fuel this transmogrification. And their chief scientist is like, yes, it's so technical and so advanced. Even I don't really know how it works. And I'm like, wow, that's
who does?
Yeah, that's not that's not a great thing to be stating in front of all these people. But I like the fact that it basically, it's a great idea that whatever this is, whatever this beam is, whatever this gas is, whatever it is they're using, plays on your psyche and begins to transform you into something that would either you help or whatever, plays on your fears if it's tuned in, like mood slimy almost. And they were finding that the miners were transforming to have claws and their arms were changing to make digging easier, to make mining easier, as they were having claws and stuff. And I thought that was a really cool idea, that they were basically mutating because of the needs of what they're doing. The planet was helping them to sort of, to do this in a weird way. To flip it around then, Perry, who has seemed to be quite proactive in many cases, like not violent or anything, but proactive in trying to deal with things and being upfront with people, is transmorphing into a bird because she wants to fly away from the situations. But that made no sense. It looked good, not the transition, but the makeup looked perfectly fine.
Yeah.
But this idea that she's transmogrifying into a bird because she wants to fly away from the sort of like the dangers in the situation felt like such utter crap. Even for the short term, even seeing her in this episode, I was like, that makes no sense.
What else would you have it be?
I don't know.
I feel disgusting, so I'm turning into a slime mold, or I don't know. To me, the whole, I like the makeup. And there were elements. I mean, I don't really understand any of this technology.
No.
There are aspects of the hallucinations and tapping on fear that is interesting. On the other, and there doesn't. It's like this element X that kind of does whatever the plot needs or plays on people's fears. But then that's not really a theme throughout the whole thing. I mean, that's very different. Inner psychological fears are very different than fear of a totalitarian state and really being caught and executed. And there's no sense of like, well, the miners, as they were mining this, were finding their fears manifest. And so we developed these special kinds of technologies. It's not woven through the script. It's just something very weird. And so I like that makeup. I like that Syl looks at the other one and says, oh, it's almost attractive now, because it's like becoming fish-like. That's kind of cute. But yeah, I mean, at the same time, I'm bothered by how they obviously are going to stay humanoid. I mean, you're told not, but it's like you don't have the technology to really pull this thing off. And I don't understand, but I'm willing to let go the idea of a sort of molecular scrambler that hits you and causes pain, and by the fourth hit, you're going to die. Doesn't make any sense. It's stupid as hell, right? Like, what percentage of your molecules are being destroyed? How exactly is that causing you pain, but you're surviving? I mean, I don't know any of this. But, okay, it's like the mirror universe, like a painalizer thing.
Yes.
But that mutation thing, that seems to me to be what you were saying of like, there's a ton of ideas in here, and some of them work and some of them don't. And none of them fully work and none of them fully don't. That is on the far end of just does not work for me.
No, I agree.
It's a kind of cool idea, but I don't know why it's in there.
It's one of those ideas, like you say, there's no purpose to it. Where it could just as easily be like, because you've seen the light beam technology that tortures them, or other things. Like, it could easily just be other technology you've already seen. This transmogrification technology, it serves no purpose. Like, it doesn't have a payoff right at the end. So yeah, it's one of those in the writing room, whatever. Someone should have just gone. Even from a budgetary point of view, I think someone could have just gone. Yeah, we don't need to do this bird makeup. Can we just drop that? And just, you've done light beams already. Can we just do that? And have them be tortured or something? Like, you've literally got a set where you could have them hung up, strung up. Let's use that.
Yeah. Well, I did think the noose thing, the hanging, was quite effective. I mean, there's something primitive about that really works, and then you find out it was all a con. It's all a way to. Apparently, when they were filming that, part of the set collapsed, and the principal actors were not on it at the time, but and the nooses were made so that if something happened, they would not actually be hung. But it's scary to imagine, the set collapsing when an actor's in a noose. How easily that could go wrong. But yeah, I agree with you. I had the same thought about budgetary constraints. Like, dude, let's put earphones on somebody and have flashing lights and say, here's the new version of the torture device that scrambles your brainwaves and makes you go crazy and hallucinate these things that are horrible. Why not do that? Why? It just doesn't make much sense.
No, it feels a bit like you say. This where it becomes like a bit of a fruit salad, isn't it? It's like it's just chucking everything in it. Just keep going. There's lots of things. And it would be, if you just refined it, it would obviously, like, it wouldn't take anything away. If you removed that and had to, like, it wouldn't change the plot. It wouldn't make it any lesser. It'd probably, make it a little bit more streamlined. So yeah, no, it just feels weird. It just feels like this really bizarre sort of like extra thing that they're like, it's like a new ticking clock, isn't it? Oh, they weren't able to do the final DNA-ization of them, or what? No, just.
Well, and then the reversion back, like,
looks awful.
Well, it looks awful, but it's also so stupid and illogical. I mean, it's like, does that mean that if you stop scrambling somebody's molecules that they revert back? Well, no, that amps up over time so that nobody survives 4 of them. how, I mean, it's just so convenient, right?
I will agree. One of the things I hate is cliche and a trope is that thing of like, if we stop this halfway through, they're going to revert back to their original state. And I'm constantly like, if I cook a chicken for half of time, it doesn't revert back to being raw. Like it stays half cooked. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
I
Well, it's like
hate...
every horrible movie, or cartoon where it's like we're de-evolving people. I mean, I don't know how that works, but like they're becoming apes, and that one's becoming a chimpanzee. Right. As soon as that's turned off, all of that genetic change within the organism simply reverses itself automatically.
I hate that trope. I hate it
Yeah.
so much. I mean, the fact that it was the worst part of the Super Mario Brothers movie from 1992 sort of tells you how bad that idea is. Yeah, it's a trope that should die. It's a trope that should just be left and never. If there's a way of reverting, give me some techno babble that says we can. If I can de-evolve you, I can re-evolve you. I don't know. I don't care. But like, not just it fades away. Like it's
put it on reverse and make them sit there for half an hour on reverse or something.
What do they call it? Switch the polarities.
Yeah.
That seems to be a pretty standard approach. That's the logging off and logging back on again of DNA fixing. Anyway, well, I think we're sort of coming to it. I think we've talked about this one quite a lot. There's a lot to talk about in this Doctor Who. It was good. But any final thoughts on Vengeance on Varos?
But the only thing I'd like to add is that I'd like it to go further in its weird version of the Doctor, and I want, like at the end, the Doctor leaves Syl presumably to be tortured and executed. He seems perfectly fine with that. He murders about 4 people in this serial. I would like if the Doctor said at the end of and I'm not even joking, if the Doctor said at the end of this, you're like, can I get the skulls of those guys I threw in acid?
Yeah.
Like, I want to put them in the TARDIS as memorabilia. Like, I don't care about the instruction manual, but I want to look at those bastards who tried to kill me and got theirs. Just, I mean, I like that kind of, that's how willing I am to go into weird territory with the Doctor and morally ambiguous and let him be an alien. And so I don't think that, this version of the Doctor, I agree with you, it's inconsistent. It is more the kind of swashbuckling, younger type. I think, Colin Baker does a fine job, especially by the end. I'm enjoying him much more. But I do sort of want, let the Doctor be far more alien and morally ambiguous. If you're going to go in these different directions, I want it to go further. And I know I'll probably be, I'm not among the dominant Doctor Who fan in saying that, and I love the morally right Doctor Who, it makes me cry when he, decides to do the heart right thing. I love that. I love that in Trek. I love that in Doctor Who. Having said that, if you're gonna go for a swashbuckling, murderous Doctor, just go all the way. Make the difference between him and the Master not so great.
Well, they've never quite. They've tried it. It's funny because they have tried it a few times. They've dabbled in those waters, haven't they? They've dipped their toes in. They do it with Colin Baker. You can see that there's that inclination. They try it. They end up doing it more with Sylvester McCoy. Towards, because he starts as a clown and becomes a bit more dark, and next episode we're going to do Remembrance of the Daleks, and that has some of that in it. But even like Christopher Eccleston, when he first met the Eccleston Doctor, he has a little bit of that. I think he even challenges Rose at one point to actually say sort of like, oh, that's your human values. You're applying your human values on something. And so they've had it a couple of times. But you're right, they're never willing. Even Capaldi, when Capaldi sort of started, he was that grumpy sort of. They went for grumpy, but there was still that emotional ambiguity and stuff. But it always falls away. It always falls away to become just the adventurer that sort of saves the day. And I'd love to sort of see that in a bit more thing. But because again, like watching these stories, and this one sort of fueled it even more. It's like, I like some of the stuff that's happening with this. I much prefer this to the last one. to the sort of the Fifth Doctor. Lots of ideas. Not all of them work. I think there's some. I love the fact that they've gone for it. Like they've gone idea, and just sort of thrown so much in. Like, and they've just gone, screw it, we're going for it. It's almost like I'm going to keep writing until what someone tells me to stop putting stuff in this. So I enjoy so many elements of this, and they're clearly sort of like they're leaning into like satire, they're leaning into commentary. As you say, the Doctor by the end is actually a much more interesting character. By the end of this serial, and I'm enjoying him much more. I enjoy the second half of him much more, but I think the whole planet of Varos thing is really interesting. I love the fact you've got the alien in Syl. There's just so many good parts of this I'm actually really enjoying. But I do still keep coming back to this idea I have of, like, I want to see the ghost of Christmas Past for the Doctor. Like, him having to face up. I'm convinced of it now. Like, there's a story to be told of, like, the Master going, like, for this exact point. Like, I want to see the, John Sim version of the Master from the Tennant era coming back and being sort of like facing up to whoever comes back as the Doctor and being like, oh, you're so annoyingly sort of moralistic. You keep thinking you're this sort of the arbiter of what is right in the galaxy. You know, you keep doing these things. Let's take a look at the wake that you've left behind. Not just the Time War, because the Time War, it was created as this sort of like middling point, wasn't it, between the old and the new. And that created this whole thing of like, oh, he's going to have a gritty backstory. Yeah. Everything you did, you know, the War Doctor, right? Let's have a look at like, yeah, but the War Doctor came from somewhere. Let's look at all the stuff you left behind in your wake. Let's go to the Macra Terror, sort of, you know, let's go to Varos. Let's go to these places. Let's see what happened after you left. And be shown this thing and have the Doctor be like almost like deconstructed as this sort of like, you know, you like this swashbuckler with little care for, because they've done it with companions. They did it with, you know, they brought back Sarah Jane didn't they, with Tennant, and were like, oh, you leave us behind and stuff. But even that ended up in her having a spin-off to be like, oh, it's terrible being left behind by the Doctor. But then we got more adventures, and it's sort of like, oh no, look, I would love this to be, even if it's in comics or books, like just a proper deconstruction where the Doctor has to face up to, you know, you get to have fun, you save the day, but some poor sod's then got to come in and change and actually manage the future. That sort of thing. I don't know. I just think there's just something there that I really want to see.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, and that's so much of what I loved about the New Who was that focus on companions, that painful awareness, especially in the Davies years of like, yeah, this is the best time of my life, but I also know I'm here at your whim, and this will sometimes end, and I'm going to be like the guy who went to the Olympics at 16, and you know the rest of my life was like, yep, working in the strip mall, you know, remembering that. And I love these sort of downsides. And I love what you're saying, that it's quite right that in Star Trek, this is talked about too, right? You know, Kirk just leaves, blah, blah, blah. But there's the Federation that you're told, like, all right, there's a support team who comes in. And here, you know, the Doctor just, you know, he's very arrogant. And even the good doctors are the most goody two-shoes, I mean, are very arrogant in deciding what's right for other people and assuming it's going to work out. And I'd like the Doctor to, you know, have to look at the ensuing 2,000 years of video nasties from Vice World that were exported after he left Varos.
I really want to see that. And how they used the transmogrification ray to really up the ante of what they were doing. Because you say about Star Trek, just want to say, I don't know if you've seen it, but even the animated series Lower Decks, actually addressed it, because you have First Contact, and they had Second Contact, where they go in to help set things up. So that the creators actually are abundantly aware, and I'd love to see it more in this series.
Well, we're gonna get a new Davies era. Yes, praise Jesus, and you know. There's talk of spin-offs, so we could get Doctor Who Lower Decks. I mean, it's not unthinkable.
Well, just so you know, just as another point, they had, the Whittaker years are quickly wrapping up. We're very close to the end. We had one recently, and they gave a trailer for the last episode of the Whittaker years. And in that, I don't know, have you seen it? Because this is
not.
It's not.
It's on my DVR.
Okay. Oh, yeah. I'm not. There's nothing in the episode, but the trailer. I'm going to give you something from the trailer then.
Go ahead.
It's abundantly in the trailer. Perry comes back.
Mm.
I think it's Perry and Ace come back. So the last two sort of major companions are there with the Whittaker Doctor, and that to me is interesting because I had to Google because Perry, she only for a short period of time. Because, and I will admit it, the reason I Googled was like, wow, she's really attractive. And, they clearly like to put her in tight clothing. I was like, is that a thing? It was clearly a thing. But she's left on a planet. She marries a warrior king on another planet and was basically left there off screen. So they're trying to give, it looks like they're trying to give companions their due by the end of this, because obviously Ace never got her finished because the series finished before she was able to. But we will be talking about Ace on the next episode. So I was just interested that they are bringing those companions back to do a bit more of that addressing of the relationship with the Doctor and companions. So we'll see how that goes. But yes, any last sort of, we are up for time.
I'm all good.
All good.
It's been a fascinating journey. I won't say trek. And we'll conclude it next time before our wrap up. Yes.
Remembrance of the Daleks on the last with Sylvester McCoy. It's the seventh Doctor. But yes, this has been fantastic. So we're moving on. And but ladies and gentlemen, if you're liking what we're doing, if you're really enjoying what we're doing, just jump onto your podcast catcher, wherever you're listening to us, and leave a review. We really appreciate them. We really, really do, especially if you're enjoying this, because our bonus episodes, our bonus little retrospectives are great fun. I'm loving doing this. It's been fantastic. I've watched more classic Who now than I ever have before. So go and leave us a review. Let us know what you're thinking. Come find us on social media, at PodTimeSpace on Twitter. Come find us. Come have those chats. But if you really enjoy what me and Julian are doing, the conversations we have, come find us on Patreon. Link down below, www.patreon.com/20cgmedia. That's 20 CG Media. And we do trekking through the Twilight Zone. So just as we are doing with Doctor Who, we are doing with Twilight Zone, episode by episode, trying to keep it to about 15 to 20 minutes on each episode. But this is some amazing stuff on there. We've had some fantastic conversations. And we're well into the second series now. Of original Twilight Zone, so that's been going fantastic. So anyway,
absolutely.
Julian, thank you very much.
Like us on wherever you're getting your podcasts.
Yes.
Leave a review. We really appreciate it, and we work a lot on this. We spend time on it, get it right, and we really appreciate you listening and helping to get the word out.
Yeah, spread the word. That's it. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening, and we shall see you on the next episode.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.